When you put labels on yourself, you limit the results that you can get in your life. You limit the knowledge that you can obtain. You limit the spiritual powers that you have. You limit yourself from finding out the truth. And you limit yourself from reaching your full potential. Today I'm showing you what labels are helpful to keep, which labels are good to discard, and what happened when I got rid of certain labels from my life. What does it mean to label yourself? To label yourself, it means to assign a particular category to yourself. That category is usually something that you don't expect to change over the course of your life. A label usually starts with the words I am. Here are some examples of labels that I currently have assigned to myself. I am a woman. I am British. I am a mother. I am married. I'm an entrepreneur. I am gluten-free. I am plant-based. And here are some examples of labels that I used to have in my life which I have now discarded. I am no longer a Christian. I am no longer a fruitarian. I am no longer a mosher. If you don't know what that means, I'll explain in a minute. I am no longer a runner. I am no longer depressed. I am no longer an insomniac. And I am no longer an ME sufferer. Why do we need to label ourselves? Many of our labels were in fact given to us by other people. We didn't decide to have them. Sometimes we have labels assigned to us because of particular actions that we've taken, and these actions can be irreversible, like having children. And some labels are assigned to us because we were born like that and we can't change it. And these are labels that you don't decide to adopt yourself, and these include things like where you were born, whether you're a parent, whether you're married, the job you currently have, or medical conditions that you've been diagnosed with. And there are other types of labels that you do decide to adopt yourself, and these are things based on your interests, your beliefs, and your personality. These labels can include things like the type of music you listen to, the way you dress, your political views, your religious views, the sporting activities you like doing, and food you like eating. The main reason that we decide to adopt these kind of labels is so that we can express our personality and bond with other like-minded people. And that can be a good thing. It can be really fun to find like-minded people. We have been given a certain amount of preferences and desires and a type of personality, and it does make sense that we would gravitate towards other people who are interested in the same things, so we can enjoy the same kind of activities with them. We can enjoy having conversations that stimulate us. So it makes perfect sense for us to put labels on ourselves based on our preferences so that we can identify other people and they can identify us, and we can bond together and enjoy our time together. This is a really positive thing to do. And although there are positives in labeling yourself, there are also a lot of downsides as well. So let's talk about that now. The problems with labeling yourself. When you create labels for yourself based on your own preferences, you are limiting yourself to always be associated with that particular preference. You are influencing how other people see you. You form friendships based on that particular preference. And when you change your mind, then you can end up losing your friends because you no longer have that certain preference in common. But certain labels are very easy to change your mind about. For certain things based on preferences, for labels such as musical preferences, clothing and appearance, sporting activities, hobbies and interests. It can be really easy to change your mind about these labels, and not many people would mind if you did change your mind. Yes, you might lose that particular circle of friends, but other people in your life, your closest friends, your family that always stick with you, wouldn't mind too much if you changed these particular labels. But changing other types of labels can be a lot more destructive. People get very attached to labels based on belief systems surrounding things like religious views, political views, and even dietary preferences. And the use of these labels can be very destructive. People get very passionate about these particular interests, and there are often very strong societies set up based around these particular labels. Often religious labels, they can be given to us from birth, from our parents, Often our family is involved with these particular religious beliefs. You've been going to your religious establishment from birth. That might be where all your family is. It might also be where all of your friends are. You might be heavily ingrained in this particular community because people are so passionate about these particular views. So for this reason, it's very hard to change your mind about your religious views and let go of your religious labels. Spiritual labels are the most destructive labels of them all. You can face mental and physical attacks as a result of changing your spiritual labels. It creates great divides between you and other people. But here's why spiritual labels are the most destructive. The reason spiritual labels are the most destructive is because it creates a barrier between you and God. You are actually blocking God with your spiritual label. You are putting God in a box and refusing to see the truth. And the reason why you are blocking God when you have a spiritual label is because everything ultimately comes from God. It doesn't come from the spiritual label, from the belief system that you uphold. It comes directly from God. All of the results that you have in your life come directly from God, not from your spiritual beliefs. All of the knowledge that you have in your life comes directly from God and not from your spiritual labels. All of the spiritual powers that you have as a human, like the ability to create your reality, come directly from God and not from your spiritual beliefs. Your purpose in life, the desires you have, and your true potential come directly from God. And ultimately, the truth comes directly from God. It doesn't come through spiritual beliefs. So if you put God in a box, then you are limiting God. And if you adopt any spiritual label, you are putting God in a box because you are saying it has to be like this and it can't be like that. Are there any benefits to labeling yourself? The main benefits of labeling yourself is that it helps you to connect to like-minded people and have more fun and enjoyment with them, or achieve a particular purpose together. And another good reason for labeling yourself is to give other people information that they might require to help you get your own needs met. For example, if you have a particular diet or medical condition, then other people will need to know that, so putting a label on that will help them to understand you. However, I'm not saying that all medical labels are positive. On the contrary, focusing on medical labels can actually make the problem much more focused in your own life and make the problem worse. I think it's good to give people the information that they need when they absolutely have to have that information, but above and beyond that, then it's probably better not to mention medical problems if you don't have to, because it just draws your attention to it and other people's attention to it. It gives you sympathy from other people, which can be a positive thing, and that can lead to you not wanting to get rid of the medical problem, because a lot of medical problems, in fact, most medical problems, you can get rid of. Most people won't believe that. They think they are stuck with their health problems, but I have recovered from so many health problems that I know that this is not true. And there isn't just problems with having negative labels, there's also problems with having positive labels as well. Say, for example, you have labeled yourself an overachiever or a perfectionist, or maybe you've even been called a genius. You would think that they are all pretty good labels, but what they do, in fact, is actually put you in a box that you can't escape from. They put so much pressure on you to remain consistent to that label that it actually creates a lot of tension when you can't live up to being that label all the time. People expect a certain standard from you, and they will be highly disappointed when they don't get that standard from you if you have given them the expectation that the standard's always going to be at the highest level. And this is why the advice for raising children now is that not only should you not call them negative names, insult them, but you also shouldn't do the opposite. You shouldn't give them positive labels because it puts so much pressure on them. They tell you now, don't tell your kids that they are smart, because they don't always make smart decisions, and they'll really beat themselves up when they make a mistake. They won't be able to learn and grow from their mistakes because they'll think that they should always be smart. They should always be the most intelligent one. Now I want to share with you what happened when I removed labels from my own life and the impact it had on me. Going back to my teenage years, and I'm showing my age now, and if you are British, you'll probably recognize these terms, but when I was at school, you either had to choose to be a mosher or a raver. A raver was into heavy dance music, and a mosher was into rock music, hard rock music like heavy metal. And I chose to be a mosher. But all of my friends were ravers. There was not many moshers in my school. For some reason, all of my friends were ravers, and I secretly liked rave music and also rock music, but I would never admit that I liked rave music because I dressed like a mosher. I had placed this label on myself that I couldn't escape from, and I couldn't admit to other people that I liked my friends' music because I had a self-image to preserve. Thankfully, my friends accepted me for who I was, maybe because I accepted them for who they were. Another label that I got rid of in my life was the label of chronic fatigue syndrome sufferer. After having chronic fatigue syndrome for 6 years in total, consisting of periods of 2 years each time, 3 long spells of chronic fatigue syndrome, I was identified as a chronic fatigue sufferer, and the doctors diagnosed me with ME, with chronic fatigue syndrome. And I remember I joined a chronic fatigue syndrome support group, and in this support group it consisted of people who had been going there for a really long time, for 10 years, and other people who were very new to it like me. And as soon as I joined that group, I had actually had a breakthrough in terms of my own health. So I had a massive recovery, and a very, very quick recovery. And I felt so much better the second and third time I went to the group. And I realized at that point that I had overcome chronic fatigue syndrome. And I tried to tell people in the group that I had overcome chronic fatigue syndrome. And the people who were new to the group were really excited for me, congratulating me, wanted to know what I did so that they could do the same thing, so that they could recover. And the people who had been there for a really long time were so identified with the label of chronic fatigue syndrome sufferer that they were very negative about my own recovery. They said things like, oh, it'll probably just be a temporary blip, you'll have a relapse like you did every other time, you can't ever really overcome chronic fatigue syndrome, once you've got it for life. And thankfully I haven't had a relapse. I think that was about 4 years ago now, and thankfully my health has never been better. After I got diagnosed with a health condition, that I realized what the problem was. I got diagnosed with celiac disease, and that meant I was having these bouts of chronic fatigue syndrome, and when I changed my diet, I was able to recover, and thankfully I know what was causing the problem, and I'm not going to eat gluten again. So the label of being gluten-free is a label that I do intend to keep because it's very helpful for me to maintain my good health. Another label that I have got rid of is a raw foodist. I used to be like a fruitarian, ate nothing but raw food. I did that for 10 months. I joined these groups. I made loads of friends. I went to a fruit festival. I really embraced the lifestyle. I never felt better. I wanted to share the positivity with other people. And then 10 months later, I just decided I didn't want to do it anymore. And what happened? I lost all my friends. I no longer could go to the group. I no longer could go to the festival. Well, I could have gone to the festival, but I didn't identify with that label anymore, so I didn't see the point in embracing that lifestyle anymore. It also had an impact on the business that I had started. I'd started a business all around that topic. And then as soon as I stopped eating that way, I could no longer carry on with my YouTube channel, encouraging people to eat raw food, because I wasn't a product of the product anymore. So it did have a big impact on my lifestyle. My whole lifestyle changed as a result of changing my diet. And that's because I had attached such a strong label to myself as a raw foodist that I had changed so much in my life as a result. Another label that I have let go of is the label of suffering from insomnia. And at the point where I let go of that label, I was actually still experiencing insomnia, but I decided I was no longer going to talk about it. I was no longer going to call myself an insomniac. And sometimes I would say to people that I didn't sleep last night very well, Or in the past, I used to struggle with my sleep, but I would never predict the future by saying I am an insomniac, because that says I'm always going to have this problem and it's something that I didn't want. And after I dropped that label, my sleep got a million times better. It really did change. I started to believe that I was somebody who had the occasional bad night's sleep, just like everybody else. I also imagined that I was a good sleeper, which is the thing that really helped. And the biggest label that I have got rid of in my own life is the label of a Christian. And this is the hardest label that I had to let go of. When I became a Christian, I was a very passionate Christian. I got heavily involved in the church. I made a massive big group of friends. A lot of my own friends actually converted to being a Christian. And I actually encouraged other friends to be a Christian as well. So I ended up with this massive group of friends and a lot of family who were Christians. It's also the way I met my husband, through a Christian dating site. So my husband and I had been bringing up our children to be Christians. We had been going to church for a very long time. And then I decided, it wasn't a quick decision, but through a gradual process of awakening to the truth, that I no longer wanted to have this label as a Christian. And through a lot of soul searching, I came to the conclusion that although I did believe the words of the Bible, that I was interpreting the Bible differently from everybody else, and I didn't believe the words that were spoken in church, in the preaches, in the worship music, in the words that were coming out of my friends' mouths, and although I respected their differences, I no longer believed in the same thing, and therefore couldn't give myself that label anymore. I tried to have deep, meaningful conversations with my Christian friends about spirituality, about God, and it always resulted in going back to the Bible for the answers to everything. And I wanted to go beyond the Bible. I wanted to experience God. I'd had so many experiences of God that didn't come from reading the Bible, that just came from a spiritual experience, results from prayer, through manifestation. And I loved these spiritual experiences, but I just didn't find that people were interested in talking about these kind of things. All people wanted to do was argue about what the Bible says and study the Bible, and I wasn't as interested in that. So I dropped the label as Christian, and it was the most freeing thing that I've ever done in my entire life. Yes, it was difficult, and some of my closest friends were very disappointed. But I finally got all of the answers to my spiritual questions that I could never get inside of the church. So I knew that it was the right thing to do. It just felt like the truth to me. So how do you avoid labeling yourself? First of all, recognize which labels can't be changed. Things like where you were born, who your parents are, if you have kids, and these kind of things. You don't have to focus on them, but it's better to just accept them because you can't change them. You can change your memory of them. You could start to believe a different memory of them, but that doesn't change the actual truth, but most people don't want to go there. After that, look at the labels that you want to stop focusing on, but you don't think you can change them. Things that you might want to stop focusing so heavily on might be things like the color of your skin, your gender, your health conditions. These are all things that people think they can't change, but it might lead to having a negative experience in life if you label yourself too heavily and associate yourself too heavily with those labels that you feel like you've already been given. And there are examples of people who have changed these particular labels, but again, most people don't want to go there. Next, it's good to recognize the labels that exist to provide helpful information for others, and you'll want to keep those labels as well. The next labels that you'll want to keep are the labels that help you to connect to people based on personal preferences, but recognize that any friendships or relationships that are built on these preferences might not stand the test of time and might disintegrate when you change your mind. And this can also be applied to any businesses or jobs that are based on personal preferences. All other labels you will probably want to drop. So if you want to drop a label, this is how you do it. Decide that you are no longer going to talk about that label. You don't have to tell anybody that you are dropping the label. You don't need to make a big performance about it and go around announcing it to all of your friends and family. That might actually be very destructive. You might want to avoid doing that, but you can just decide in your own mind, I just don't want to associate with that label anymore. And you might be asking, well, what if somebody asks me about that particular label? What do I say? So here's how I approach the situation. If I don't want to correct somebody and I don't want to get into an argument and I don't want to highlight the fact that there are now massive differences between them and me, this is what I do about the situation. I remember this when I went back into church very recently, just to try it out to see how I felt about church now that I no longer identify as a Christian. And people were asking me questions like, when did you become a Christian? And I wasn't really ready to tell them that I wasn't a Christian, because I would have had to tell them my whole story and I didn't really want to do that. So I thought I would just give them a very quick answer. And this answer wasn't lying, but it also wasn't correcting them either. And I would just say something like, when I was in my mid-20s, I started to experience God for the first time. Or I got invited to church when I was in my mid-20s. Or I started getting really interested in God when I was in my mid-20s. All of these, they're not lying, but you don't have to go around creating arguments all the time. You just need to focus on what you believe instead, and you don't have to create that big barrier. Now I'm going to share with you what I believe is the only one label worth having. And that one label that's worth having is who you really are. And that who you really are is not even human, that you are the one universal mind. That is who you really are. And to me, that's the only label worth having. Adopting that label will change everything in a positive way in your life. It will help you to connect with all humans because you know the truth of the human existence. It will help you to forgive people straight away and not hold a grudge. It will help you to accept yourself exactly as you are, yourself as a human. It will help you to not be concerned about what people think about you and just embrace life exactly as it is. It's a very freeing label to have, and that's why I highly recommend that you adopt that label. So here's some mistakes to avoid. Don't feel like you have to give yourself labels in order to bond with people. The biggest bond you have is that you are all living this human experience and you are all ultimately the one universal mind. And because we are all one, they are you and you are them, and that is the biggest bond you can ever have with anybody else. And there is no need for labels when you see yourself all as one. Here are 2 videos that you can watch next. Is free will an illusion? And that is going to blow your mind. How to be the main character in your life from a spiritual perspective. Leave me a comment below letting me know what labels have you discarded in your life and what have the results been. And while you're there, in the description you can check out my products, like this video, subscribe for more, and now it's your turn to go and put your stamp on the world.